Las Vegas should not exist. A glittering city of more than 2 million people, glowing improbably in the middle of the Mojave Desert, one of the hottest and driest places in all of North America, where summer temperatures now shatter records and the thermometer has climbed to a brutal 117 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet it thrives anyway, its fountains dancing, its pools shimmering, its lights burning against the desert night. How? The answer is a single wall of concrete about 30 miles away. Las Vegas drinks almost all of its water from one reservoir, Lake Mead, held back by the Hoover Dam. Nearly every single drop that keeps that improbable city alive sits behind that one dam. And that is the terrifying truth this story is built on. Vegas is not unique. All across the world, great cities are balanced on the same bet, staking their entire existence on the water trapped behind a single dam. So when the heat in Las Vegas climbs to a new record high, it is not just a local weather story. It is a warning flare for every city on Earth that lives behind a dam. And it tells us exactly which ones run dry first. Las Vegas is the perfect place to begin, because no city on Earth has bet more brazenly on defeating the desert. It saw the danger to its single reservoir years ago, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars drilling a new intake deep beneath Lake Mead, a so-called third straw, positioned so low it could keep pulling water even if the lake fell below the point where its neighbors could reach it. In effect, Las Vegas quietly built itself a lifeboat, an admission, in concrete and steel, of exactly how real the threat of a dying dam has become. If the most water-obsessed, forward-planning desert city in the world felt compelled to prepare for its reservoir failing, that tells you everything about how seriously the rest of us should take the same danger. Las Vegas is not the city most likely to run dry. It is the city most aware that it could, and that awareness is the alarm it is sounding for everyone else. Because here is what extreme heat does to a dam, and it is not what most people imagine. A dam does not make water. It cannot create a single drop. All it does is hold back a river and store the water in a reservoir behind it, a giant open-air tank in the landscape. And that is precisely the weakness. When temperatures soar to record highs, that enormous exposed surface of water evaporates at a staggering rate, lifting billions of gallons straight up into the sky and losing them forever. At the same time, the heat shrinks the mountain snowpack that feeds most of these reservoirs, so less water flows in even as more boils off the top. And the same heat drives up demand, as millions of people and their crops and their air conditioners all cry out for more water at once. Evaporation up, inflow down, and demand up, all at the same moment. A dam that looked mighty and permanent can empty with shocking speed, because a reservoir is only ever as strong as the balance between what flows in and what disappears. Turn up the heat, and that balance breaks. Consider just the evaporation alone, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. A large reservoir baking in the desert sun can lose an amount of water to the sky every year, comparable to what a good-sized city drinks in the same period. Water that simply rises off the surface as vapor and blows away, never reaching a single tap. The hotter and drier the air above the reservoir, the faster it happens. And the great artificial lakes behind the world's dams were mostly built in exactly the hot, dry places where that loss is worst. It is a cruel design flaw hiding inside humanity's proudest water infrastructure. To store water in the desert, we spread it out into a vast flat sheet with an enormous surface area, which is precisely the shape that loses the most to evaporation. In a cooler world, the rivers refilled the reservoirs faster than the sun could empty them, and the system stayed ahead. In a record heat world, that arithmetic flips. The sun starts winning. So let's count down the 5 great cities whose dams run dry first, and understand why. Number 5 is Los Angeles, and like Las Vegas, it is a city that has no natural right to its own size. A sprawling megacity of millions, in a semi-arid basin, Los Angeles imports the overwhelming majority of its water, more than 80%, from far away. A huge share of it comes from the same Colorado River that feeds Vegas, captured behind dams like the Hoover, and pulled across the desert through hundreds of miles of aqueduct. The rest comes largely from the snowpack of the distant Sierra Nevada mountains, funneled south through the Great California aqueducts. Both of these lifelines are exactly what extreme heat attacks. The Colorado River's reservoirs have been shrinking for a quarter century, toward record lows, and the Sierra snowpack, in the hottest years, has at times nearly vanished, leaving the aqueducts running thin. Los Angeles has enormous wealth and is investing heavily in recycling and local supply, so it will hold out longer than most. But a city that drinks water stored behind dams a state away fed by snow that a hot enough winter can erase, is far more fragile than its glittering surface suggests. When the heat spikes, the dams that feed Los Angeles are among the first to feel the strain. Number 4 is Phoenix, Arizona. And Phoenix is uniquely doubly exposed because it does not lean on one system of dams but two, and both are failing at once. Like Las Vegas and Los Angeles, Phoenix draws a large share of its water from the Colorado River from Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam, carried into the city through a massive canal that climbs uphill across the desert. But Phoenix also depends on a second, older network of dams on the Salt and Verde rivers, reservoirs like the one behind Roosevelt Dam that have watered the valley for over a century. In a record heat future, both of these systems come under siege simultaneously. The Colorado is already shrinking, and Phoenix, by an old agreement, stands first in line to lose that water when shortages hit. And the Salt and Verde reservoirs depend on the same overheated, dwindling snowpack and rainfall as everything else. In the region, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities in America, adding people at breakneck speed, sitting in a furnace where temperatures now routinely pass 115 degrees. And it is betting that two separate sets of drying dams can keep pace with its explosive growth. When the heat sets records, Phoenix is squeezed from both directions at once. And Phoenix has a further problem hiding beneath its feet. When its dams and canals fall short, the city and the farms around it reach for groundwater, pumping ancient water out of the aquifers below the desert. But that underground reserve is itself already stressed and shrinking, drawn down faster than it can ever refill. So the fallback for a dam-based supply is a groundwater supply that is quietly failing on its own. Phoenix, in other words, has no comfortable safety net. Its Colorado River water is first to be cut. Its local river dams depend on the same failing snow and rain, and the aquifer beneath it is being emptied. 3 sources, all under pressure, all in a city that keeps building new subdivisions across the desert, as though the water beneath the promise were guaranteed. In a record heat future, a metropolis of millions discovers that having several sources of water means little when every one of them is drying at the same time. Number 3 is Cape Town, South Africa. And Cape Town has already shown the entire world exactly what it looks like when a city's dams run dry. Cape Town depends on a system of surface reservoirs, dominated by one great dam called Theewaterskloof, which holds the majority of the city's water supply. In 2018, after 3 years of severe drought and heat, that dam and the reservoirs around it dropped catastrophically, the main dam falling to around 1/10 of its capacity, its floor cracking into bare, dusty earth where a lake had been. The city began a public countdown to what it called Day Zero, the day the municipal taps would be switched off and millions of residents would have to queue at guarded collection points for a strict daily ration of water. Through desperate conservation and the return of the rains, Cape Town escaped at the very last moment, pushing Day Zero off the calendar. But the images of that cracked, empty dam bed became the global symbol of urban water collapse. Cape Town proved that a modern, well-run city, in a matter of a few hot, dry years, can come within weeks of its dams running dry. And in a record heat world, those few dry years arrive more often. What made Cape Town's crisis so instructive was how fast it went from comfortable to catastrophic. Only a few years before Day Zero, the same dams had been reassuringly full, and the city had every reason to believe its water was secure. Then 3 dry years in a row, amplified by heat, drew the reservoirs down faster than anyone had planned for. And suddenly, a modern metropolis was rationing residents to a strict allowance of water per person per day, a fraction of ordinary use, with families catching shower water in buckets to flush their toilets. The city painted lines on its dams and published the levels like a stock ticker, a whole society watching a number fall toward a cliff. The lesson for every other dam-dependent city was chilling. The buffer you think you have can evaporate in just a few bad seasons, and by the time the danger is obvious, you may be only weeks, not years, from the taps shutting off. Cape Town survived on luck and desperate discipline. The next city may have neither. Number 2 is Cairo, Egypt, a megacity of some 20 million people that depends, more than almost any great city on earth, on a single dam holding back a single river. Roughly 97% of Egypt's fresh water comes from the Nile, and much of that water is stored behind the Aswan High Dam in an enormous reservoir called Lake Nasser. That lake sits in one of the hottest, driest deserts on the planet, and its vast surface loses staggering quantities of water to evaporation under the relentless sun. Billions upon billions of gallons vanishing into the sky every year even before anyone drinks a drop. Now add rising heat. which accelerates that evaporation further. And a second human threat. Far upstream, Ethiopia has built a giant new dam on the Nile's main tributary, and Egypt fears it could reduce the flow that refills Lake Nasser, turning water into a source of genuine international conflict. A country of well over 100 million people, packed almost entirely along one thin ribbon of river, storing its survival behind one dam in the middle of a furnace, has almost no room for error. When the heat climbs to records, Lake Nasser evaporates faster, and Cairo feels the single most exposed water supply of any megacity on Earth begin to tighten. There is a bitter irony in Egypt's position, because the Aswan High Dam was built precisely to give Egypt control and security over its water, taming the Nile's floods and storing years of supply in Lake Nasser. For decades, it worked as intended, a triumph of engineering that let Egypt's population swell into the hundreds of millions. But that same enormous reservoir, sitting in the blazing heart of the Sahara, is now one of the largest evaporation losses on the planet, quietly surrendering a share of the entire nation's water to the sky every single year. The dam that was meant to guarantee Egypt's future has become a giant open pan simmering in the desert sun. And Egypt has almost nowhere else to turn. It has no great alternative river, no significant rainfall, no deep untapped aquifers to fall back on. It is the Nile stored behind that dam, or it is nothing. For a nation that will soon number well over 150 million people, that is a breathtakingly narrow foundation, and every record-breaking summer makes it a little narrower. And number 1, the city whose dams are already running dry as heat and drought converge, is Baghdad, Iraq, at the heart of a nation that was once the very cradle of irrigation and is now watching its rivers die. Iraq is the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and for thousands of years those rivers made civilization itself possible. Today, they are collapsing. Iraq has endured its driest conditions in roughly a century, and its water reserves have fallen to catastrophic lows, the reservoirs behind its dams reportedly dropping to a tiny fraction of their capacity, in some accounts as little as 8%. The country's total stored water has plummeted from around 60 billion cubic meters just a few years ago to a small fraction of that. Two forces are strangling Baghdad at once. Overhead, brutal heat that regularly pushes past 120 degrees evaporates what little water remains and bakes the land. And upstream in Turkey and Iran, a vast network of dams, more than 20 major barriers on the two rivers, captures the flow before it ever reaches Iraq, so that the country receives only a fraction of the water it was once guaranteed. Baghdad sits at the bottom of a drying, overdammed system, in punishing heat, watching the rivers that birthed human civilization run thin. It is the clearest, most advanced example on this list of what happens when the dams a city depends on begin truly to run dry. The human cost in Iraq is already unfolding, and it is a preview of what the other cities on this list most fear. Farmers who tended the same fields for generations have watched their land turn to dust and been forced to abandon it, migrating into overcrowded cities that cannot easily absorb them. In the south, near Basra, so little fresh river water now reaches the delta that seawater has pushed inland, turning the water salty enough to kill crops, sicken people, and destroy the marshes that are among the oldest inhabited wetlands on Earth. The situation grew so desperate that Iraq, one of the world's great oil producers, was driven to strike an extraordinary deal, effectively trading its oil wealth to secure water projects from the very upstream neighbor whose dams helped drain it. Think about that. A nation bartering the resource it has in abundance for the one resource no amount of money can manufacture. That is what the far end of this countdown actually looks like. Not a distant abstraction, but a country already reorganizing its economy and its population around the reality of dams running dry. Step back and look at all five together, and a single uncomfortable truth comes into focus. Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Cape Town, Cairo, Baghdad. These are not remote villages. They are glittering metropolises and ancient capitals, home to tens of millions of people, the beating hearts of their regions. And every one of them made the same fundamental bet, that a wall of concrete could tame a river, store its water, and guarantee an endless supply forever. For most of the 20th century, that bet looked like genius. Dams brought power, flood control, and water security to places that could never have supported great cities otherwise. The dam was the proudest symbol of humanity's mastery over nature, and behind it, cities grew without limit, confident the reservoir would always be there. Governments celebrated these dams as monuments, printed them on currency, named them after leaders, and treated the reservoirs behind them as permanent fixtures of the map, as reliable as the mountains. Whole economies and populations arranged themselves around the promise that the water would never stop. But the bet had a hidden flaw, and rising heat is exposing it everywhere at once. A dam does not create water, it only stores what the rivers and the snow provide. And in a warming world, the rivers shrink, the snow thins, and the stored water evaporates off the reservoir surface faster than ever before. The very thing that made these cities possible, the enormous open reservoir, becomes their greatest vulnerability, a giant exposed surface for the sun to steal from. The security the dams promised was always borrowed against the stable climate, and that climate is no longer stable. So the reservoirs that were supposed to guarantee these cities forever are now the exact place where their fragility is most visible, dropping year by year, ring by ring, toward the day the concrete holds back nothing but cracked mud. That is why a record high in Las Vegas is so much more than a headline about tourists frying eggs on the sidewalk. Las Vegas is the purest example of the gamble, a city that bet everything on one reservoir behind one dam in the hottest desert it could find. When the heat there breaks records, it is a live demonstration of the exact force that is emptying reservoirs all over the planet. The evaporation that accelerates over Lake Mead is the same physics accelerating over Lake Nasser in Egypt, over Theewaterskloof in South Africa, over the reservoirs of the Salt River in Arizona, and over the dying dams of the Tigris and Euphrates. Vegas is the canary, sitting in the hottest cage, and its record thermometer is the alarm. None of these cities are necessarily doomed, and that matters because despair is as dangerous as denial. The tools to survive exist. Cities can slash the enormous volumes of water lost to leaking, aging pipes. They can recycle their wastewater on a massive scale, turning what was once thrown away into a reliable new supply. They can cover or manage reservoirs to reduce evaporation, price water, so it stops being squandered, invest in desalination where the sea is close, and hardest of all, confront the reality that a hotter world simply holds less usable water and plan their size and their farming around that truth instead of against it. Some cities have already proved it can be done, cutting their water use dramatically through sheer determination after staring into the abyss. The dams do not have to run dry, but avoiding it requires acting before the reservoir hits bottom, not after, and that has been the one thing city after city has failed to do. So the question buried in the title is not really about a thermometer in Las Vegas at all. It is about a gamble that hundreds of millions of people have unknowingly placed, the gamble that a wall of concrete and a reservoir behind it could hold back the future forever. That gamble is now being tested by a heat that grows more extreme every year, and the test is being graded in the order these reservoirs empty. Los Angeles feels the strain. Phoenix is squeezed from two sides. Cape Town already glimpsed its day zero. Cairo guards the most exposed lifeline of any megacity, and Baghdad, at the very front of the line, is already living the answer, watching the reservoirs behind its dams fall toward empty in the punishing heat. When Las Vegas hits its next record high, remember that it is not just Vegas that should be watching the thermometer. It is every city on Earth that ever believed a dam could make it safe forever. Because the heat is rising, the reservoirs are dropping, and the only real question left is not whether the dams run dry, but which city stands at the front of the line when they do. The countdown has already begun, and it only moves one way, unless the people living behind these great walls of concrete finally decide to change the ending before the water is gone. The dams themselves will stand for centuries, silent and enormous, long after the crisis is decided. One way or the other, what matters is not the concrete, but the water behind it, and that water now answers to the sun far more than to any engineer. The cities on this list were built on the belief that we had conquered that truth. The rising heat is here to remind them, one dropping reservoir at a time, that we never did.